Toy Power Podcast is a free podcast made possible by the support of our awesome Patreon sponsors. Head to toypowerpodcast.com and see how you can help.
Oh yeah, business power.
Hello and welcome to Toy Power, the podcast where we talk toys and everything pop culture. G'day, it is Trent here, and it is fantastic to have your company today for episode 281. This week, it's all about wrestling. Are you gonna dust off the strongman suit and flex a few cobras?
The strongman suit?
Yeah.
I thought it was strong bad.
Oh, it could be strong
He's
bad.
a wrestler, isn't he? Strong bad?
Strong man.
It's going to go really well, I can tell.
Well, we've got someone here to rein us in. We've got Frank in the room.
Hello.
Ben.
G'day.
Scotty.
Hello there.
And the wrestling maestro himself, Mr. Criss Fresh.
Guys, long time no speak.
It is too long. Albeit impromptu
Trent,
Doncaster bump-ins.
Yeah, Trent, I ran into at a shopping centre that's not even really near me. Like, I just happened to want to kill time. I was hanging with my daughter and we went to Doncaster Shopping Centre here in Melbourne. And bizarrely, I saw this dude that strongly resembled Trent. You're thinking in your brain, it can't be Trent. Like, where this is too weird. And I just thought, I'm going to cheekily yell out Trent. And if he turns around, I guess it's Trent. And there you go. It was Trent. Yeah. And it was a very, very random meeting. I don't know where he was. Like he was with a friend who was very mysterious about the location of where Trent was being hidden away. Yeah. I'll never know. I'd prefer not to know. No. But I wanted to recommend some places, and it was sort of, I was hinting to his friend going, oh, I'm out here in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, where are you guys? And the dude just nodded. Yeah. And I was like,
I literally had no idea where I was.
And I came back around because I thought I could give him some nudges of, this. And I was like, yep, well, Aaron's Collectibles out in Blackburn, that's sort of out my way. So, and the dude just nodded. Yep. And I was like, nah, I'm out. Moses over there.
Well, we were after Doncaster, we were heading to the airport. So it was... These were all great ideas, but I was very much being chauffeured around to different spots. We did check out the Lego certified store where I bumped into another random person, which is, so 2 people in 5 minutes that I knew being in a different city, which is very, very odd.
Oh, the life of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a Lego person, but that store's pretty cool at Doncaster.
Yeah.
Because you see a lot of the sets actually set up and built and stuff. And it's near a giant zing as well. So, there's some cool stuff to look at. But before we jump into wrestling, I was going to say, guys, the state of toys in Australia, we lost Toys R Us and, our department stores are spotty, but I've got to say JB Hi-Fi are really creeping up as one of the, it started with, they got some pops, then they got some figures, but I was in there recently and their toy section is really starting to explode.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's exciting when you go into a store with no expectations. And you see something you never thought you'd see on a shelf. You something that you go, I'm just going to have to go to eBay to get that or go online. I saw the Transformers meshed with G.I. Joe Cobra Hiss Tank that turns into Megatron with the Baroness figure carded. And it's just like, well, that's brilliant.
At JB Hi-Fi?
At JB Hi-Fi. So they're getting that caliber of sort of figure in.
How much did they put on? I don't need it.
It was definitely under 100, maybe $80,
that's pretty good.
$90, something like that.
So you walk in to go buy a washing machine, you come home with a builder figure.
Yeah.
It's a win.
It is. It's great.
If they get the NECA license, they'll be, pretty amazing, I reckon. So.
And I think they're certainly undercutting Zing. And it's not obvious, but it's sort of
tiny bit.
Yeah, just it'll always be either the same price or sort of maybe $5 cheaper. So I've noticed that on Black Series.
It's gonna really hurt Toymate that's trying to find their footing, and I still can't work out their business model of hanging on to old stock forever, like some of the Toy Worlds and Toy Kingdoms do, but sort of getting new stuff in, but charging exorbitant prices and stuff. I love the idea of a giant physical store because it kind of reminds me of a Toys R Us, but I guess they're doing okay because they're opening another store in Melbourne at High Point Shopping Centre out here. So it's going to get to the point that almost every major area in Melbourne, you'll be able to find a Toymate. Hopefully they hit Adelaide. Just because we're all tragics that don't necessarily need to buy anything but like wandering into toy stores just to take in the ambience.
Is there some connection between Toy World and Toymate, or are they completely separate entities?
I think they're separate, but they're very similar in concept and stock. I think they use,
because I thought get the idea they use the same colours and things, which is that yellow and purple theme.
Oh, get me the purple bear back. That's real Toy World. Yeah. Bring back Zigzag. Let's get them all. Let's get them all going.
Yeah. It definitely feels like they've got the same distributor. It's sort of that theme. Whether there's a discount kind of element to it, that they get certain things that didn't sell in other places.
Or maybe they just pair up as, cousins, so to speak, and they say, look, we can go halves in a shipping container or something. Buying Let's just power. Do that.
A shipping container of Rathtars. Let's get in there because we all know we need plenty of them. But like, speaking of sort of old toy stores, I know wrestling figures sort of aren't any of your forte, and I won't take offense like G.I. Joe fans would. Shout out to Joel. If you don't know it, like, it's sort of, we all have our wheelhouses, and wrestling for me, I guess I'll come at it from, there's two ways I can approach this. In what I discovered in wrestling collecting later on in life through early eBay, and sort of my childhood journey with wrestling. And I think I'll go more childhood and talk about the other stuff because it's an interesting history. I was a kid, and wrestling, you guys are a little bit younger than me. Scotty, you're probably about 8 years older.
I'll laugh politely.
But, that's off the top rope.
But like wrestling was sort of really big for a while there. Like, the big events were shown on Channel 10. I remember WrestleMania 2 because it was Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy in the cage. It was all the talk of the schoolyard, but it hadn't really caught me. And even WrestleMania 3, Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan. I think even if you don't know wrestling, of
course, they're all such famous names.
Sort of being in there, like it was sort of like the WWF in the 80s. It was sort of like a synonymous thing, like Elf or He-Man or any of those sort of properties. Like the WWF sort of held its own in branding with the 80s, particularly Hogan.
Hogan had his own cartoon show.
And voiced by Brad Garrett from Everybody Loves Raymond. But sort of for me, my mum passed away when I was 9 in 1988. And I went to live with Uncle Max, and he lived by the beach in Frankston. And Uncle Max was into his wrestling, and it would be on late on Channel 10, WWF Superstars. And I was never allowed to stay up late, and I was an early to bed, early to rise sort of kid. But, Uncle Max was like, you're staying up with me. And they were showing WrestleMania 4. It probably would have been on huge delay because there were heaps of delays in Australia. And I was just watching it with Uncle Max, and it just captivated me. And I remember, like, there was a wrestler called The Rock, Don Morocco, and he'd sort of been repackaged. He was coming out in tie-dye and coming out to the music of Jesus Christ Superstar. And Uncle Max is just like pissing himself laughing, going, look at him, he's a beach bum. I love him. And I'm looking at Uncle Max going, you're always my pick for this tournament. Because it was a tournament for the heavyweight title, because Andre the Giant had swindled Hulk Hogan, and there was an evil twin referee, and like Hogan's run had ended, and they had to hold the belt up, and Macho Man Randy Savage would go on to win, forming the Mega Powers, all this. So it captivated me. And I think as a distraction of everything that was going on, I focused on wrestling. And you could go to the video store, and there were always tapes. So that sort of just became the thing. And very much of my nature is I became obsessive about it. And I unfortunately hooked onto wrestling when it sort of started to fade in popularity in Australia. So we're talking 1988, sort of 89, like pretty much by that point, it wasn't, the boom had sort of started to pass here in Australia. And I remember wanting to get an action figure. And I don't know what they had in Adelaide, but in Melbourne, sometimes you'd have a news agency with a toy world at the back.
Yep.
I don't know if you guys had that. And at the West Heidelberg Mall, there was a toy world at the back of news agents. And I remember going in there and I had wrestling figure fever. And the figures in the stores at that point, everybody would have seen them. They were giant, solid, no articulation rubber figures called by LJN. And I'm coming in pretty late into the toy line. So we get into the store and all that's on the shelf is Mean Gene Oakland, the announcer. Bald dude in a tuxedo holding a microphone. I didn't care. It was like,
give me
I
5.
want that wrestling figure. And Dad's looking at me going, you got to be kidding me. You don't want the announcer. And it was like, I remember trying to sell him because they came with posters, the LJN. So you'd get your figure on these beautiful blue cards. That's what we're going to miss with packaging now. That's another discussion for another podcast. There'd be these great bubble cards, and you'd get a poster of the figure, of the character that would be rolled up in the bottom of the packaging. And I begged him for it. And I got Mean Gene, and I didn't care. It was just awesome to have this figure. And kids at school sort of would still occasionally bring them to school because they were indestructible. It took a lot. Like, you get paint scuffs on them, but it took a lot to beat up an LJN. And the benefit I always had was coming into toy lines later, I did with He-Man, and I did with wrestling, was trash and treasure. Kids would be trying to earn pocket money and they'd be selling the toys that they didn't want. So I'd go in and I'd be finding LJNs all the time. And I'd be super excited to go, oh, they're 50 cents. I remember getting the ring for $5.
Oh, wow.
And the LJN ring is this giant plastic piece with elastic ropes and the turnbuckles and everything. It's a cool piece. I've still got the LJN ring. And overseas you could get a cage accessory for it, which I've now gotten, but those big blue bars, like if you end up getting involved with wrestling like me, it's completely impractical to have a cage like that and wrestle in it. But everything about the WWF in the 80s was big. Steroids, like it was America, wasn't it? Arnold Schwarzenegger was big, Stallone was big, Van Damme was big. Like, it was strength and muscles and all of that sort of appealed to me with wrestling. And the LJN line sort of, it spanned quite an interesting period of time. And it had such an interesting array of characters. Like, you'd get your Hulk Hogan's and your King Kong Bundy. I tell you, I think children were sent to hospital with King Kong Bundy because if you went to play with LJNs against a friend, your knuckles were in big trouble. Because these things seriously are solid rubber. And they'd weigh a ton. And you would sort of be bashing together, and eventually you'd miss and you'd clock somebody's hand, and it's no good. But so there were a couple of waves that came out that were really common. So like, it had your Pipers, your Iron Sheiks, your Hogans, your Macho Mans, George the Animal Steel, Andre the Giant. Like, they were everywhere. You'll find them everywhere. Like, they're starting to get worth a bit of money, a bit like an original He-Man's worth a lot of money now. Like, he wasn't 5-6 years ago, he was probably a $30-$40 figure, He-Man. The same as Hulk Hogan, the original Hulk Hogan with the belt, you'd pick him up for $30-$40 at the most. I remember my dad was South Australian and we're in the Rundle Mall and they had the bendies. And I remember seeing a pretty cool setup of bendies in the Rundle Mall, and I was pleading with Dad, and he was like, "No, look at, they're small. You've got these big ones. You don't want the small." I always love the artful debate of parent and child, of the child justifying under any means of why they need this new line, and the parent going, "You don't need this. It doesn't make sense in my adult brain why you would possibly need this." So they sort of, LJN had a bendy line. They had thumb wrestlers, which you would see these little figures that you stuck your thumb up their thumb. Like, they're all pretty iconic. Like, they're ridiculous, but they're iconic. And it's an expensive collection to get into. Because what happened with LJNs, they started to become rarer and rarer, even in America. And LJN stopped producing them, and a company called Grand Toys actually picked up the license.
Can you just pause for a
second?
And
Grand Toys.
2 seconds.
Yeah, all good.
Trent's just got to. His kids just come home, so he's got to. get him something out of the cabinet, right? You can just see the top of his little furry head.
I could see him digging in there.
Hey, just on a segue, are you wearing a Ninja Scrolls shirt? Your shirt?
No, I'm wearing a Sandman shirt.
Oh,
Sandman.
Right, there you go. It's very similar anime to one of the characters in Ninja Scrolls. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And it's got a wrestling tie-in because the wrestler Raven used to wear this exact shirt when he wrestled in ECW.
Very cool. Very cool.
And WCW.
As you were.
I'll jump back in on Grand Toys.
Yep.
So Grand Toys picked up the license and they sort of made some characters like the Ultimate Warrior and stuff who were popular, but they weren't around as much. And there was also a bizarre series of LJN that had like Bam Bam Bigelow, the Honky Tonk Man and stuff. And they made the disastrous decision to use black rubber as the mold and paint over it.
No.
And the way you play with LJNs is banging them together. Yeah. So getting these figures like not needing a touch up and stuff like that is almost impossible. Yeah. And it's really disappointing because they're really cool looking characters. So it's really hard to get them scuffed. Like one of my mates knew somebody that did a really good job of repainting the LJN, so they looked pretty much mint, but and they displayed really nice. But I think he just got too many orders and was like, no, I'm out. So the LJN line was around, but that was it was coming to an end when I was finding wrestling fandom, and I was just desperate for anything wrestling. Like you had magazines, you had videos, but on the shelves, there was really nothing. And then I remember, and we don't get these days anymore, but I remember just doing my walk around Northland Shopping Centre in Preston, Melbourne, and I walked into Toy World, and there on the shelf were WWF Hasbros.
Oh, nice. And what sort of year are we talking then?
1990, late 1990, maybe early 91.
Yep.
And I was never a Hogan kid. I was an Ultimate Warrior kid.
Yep.
He had it made sense being a He-Man fan. He had the face paint, he had the tassels, the muscles. Yeah. Like he looked like he could have been a He-Man character more than anyone. Yeah. Or maybe Sun Toys. He sort of, I walked in and I just remember my jaw hit the ground that there were new wrestling figures, and they were small, hard plastic figures that had action features. They were made by Hasbro, and they're commonly known as Hasbros when we refer to them. And they had tag team double packs and they had single figures. And I remember I had a war chest saved up because my family were mad punters, and they do big sweeps on Melbourne Cup where you'd put in and I won one year, and everybody was fuming because nobody wanted the kid to win. My siblings were all older than me. Being an 11-year-old kid, I think I won like $90, which was might as well have been $1 million.
Oh yeah. Right.
At that point. And I remember going, I'm going to buy everything I see. And you get the parent sort of panic of no, are you sure you want to spend your money on this? And it was like, I've been waiting to spend my money on wrestling stuff. Like there were no T-shirts, there were nothing. Like you could have got them earlier in the 80s, but by this point it was pretty much done. 1990, Channel 10 cancelled WWF Superstars, so wrestling lost its presence on television. I remember we were so far behind and you didn't have news or anything, and I was a big Ultimate Warrior fan. And I remember sitting there and Ultimate Warrior was wrestling. We call them squash matches where, the guy just beats up an unknown in 2 minutes, hits his moves, hits his finishing move. I think it's a really effective thing that doesn't get done anymore because this guy and you think he's awesome because he's killing somebody and he's got this move that nobody kicks out of. And I remember the Ultimate Warriors wrestling some fat bald dude, and an insert of the wrestler Dino Bravo popped up on the screen, and he goes, everybody wants to know which title is going to be on the line between Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, but it won't matter because I'm going to beat the Ultimate Warrior. And I just paused the tape and went, did he just say Hulk Hogan's fighting the Ultimate Warrior? And my mind just exploded that these two good guys were going to face off, and you couldn't comprehend who was going to win. and that was the final episode of WWF.
Cliffhanger.
Showed on Channel 10. And my shame with it is that when I've actually got an awesome poster from '92 that was hung in video libraries, and it had release schedules for WWF events in Australia coming out on VHS, and you can see that they're 3 to 4 months behind.
Right.
And I love the dates on it, just showing that we were behind. So I got WrestleMania 6 on VHS. I remember I was so excited, and I'll be honest, my biggest shame as a fan, I fast forwarded to the end of the match because I couldn't handle the anticipation. I couldn't take it. I had to see who won. The Ultimate Warrior did beat Hulk Hogan to unify the Intercontinental and Heavyweight title. But back to figures. So the Hasbros came out and hit Australia, and they were really cool figures, like not necessarily great to play with just for type of plastic and stuff they were and that. But I was never, as a kid, I didn't bash toys together and play with them in that way. Yep. I just used imagination and scenarios, and just having the physical representation was enough for me. Like going back to LJNs, when I used to play in the bath, because you could put LJNs in the bath, I used to use the Junkyard Dog LJN as a mech. And I'd pretend I had a mat tracker.
Yep.
And people, I'm probably a bit old to be saying that I was still in the bath playing with toys, but Mask fans would be devastated to hear me say this because it was on clearance. One of the few Mask things I got given as a kid was Laser Command.
Oh no! Oh no!
Yeah,
the one thing I don't have.
I didn't even realize Laser Command is rare until recently, and I was like, I had that. I had the stupid wooden box and the laser technology and stuff. So, and it had a weird mat tracker, and I think
it was a repaint. Like a light blue and
so I used to pretend Matt Tracker was piloting the Junkyard Dog as a mech sort of thing, like a Voltron type thing when I was playing in the bar. So LJNs were handy with that. But yeah, I always preferred just using my imagination with toys. So with the Hasbros, I was in grade 6 starting to get into year 7. So it more just became what my collection is now of just displaying them and having a representation of these characters just hanging out in my room as opposed to playing with them. And for me, it was just awesome to finally have a sign that I'm a wrestling fan and I could have these toys to display. And Hasbro sort of, I think, are amazing sculpts. The artist Ron Rudat, who did a lot of G.I. Joe stuff, he did the designs on all the Hasbro figures, and they're beautiful sculpts. You know, they're not using scan technology like they use with modern figures. You know, they're just cartoony looking, but in the right way. And yeah, I didn't care for the action features. You know, they've got horrible figures that they call jumpers, where the dude's legs are pinned together and it's got a T on the back and you push down.
It's like the old Ram Man.
Yeah, a bit like that. And I always hated that. It was like, I don't like, get rid of these action features, because I've never been big on articulation and features. You know, I don't necessarily want a statue, but I just want it to look good.
Yeah.
So I had quite a few Hasbros, but then sort of reached that age where I stopped. And I would go on to buy a few more Hasbros, because when I was in year 11, I reckon, I'd go into Kmart and there were green carded Hasbros.
Here we go.
And they were pretty lame characters.
Yep.
There was the 1-2-3 Kid, there was Atom Bomb, there was Yokozuna, there was the Smoking Guns, and there was Ludwig Borger. And they were $5 each. And I'm going, $5? I'm buying these. You know, I saw Evil Crush sitting on the shelves maybe for 3 years, you know, just didn't go. What I didn't realize, those figures never came out anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
If only you'd known.
Yeah.
The old time machine.
Green carded Hasbros are worth stupid money. I remember meeting a friend through tape trading with wrestling, which was a thing I got into because we couldn't get stuff and we could get it 2 weeks behind because people would get tape sent from America and trade it. And I met still a friend of mine, Boost, and we became friends over action figures. And he was like, oh, I get full sets of Hasbro figures that didn't come out here, like the yellow series, because they were all in different colors, the series, yellow series, red series, blue series. And I go, what, how? And he goes, oh yeah, I just pick up a set of green cards and I send it over there and they'll send me like 2 sets. And I'll go, how does that trade work? And he goes, yeah. He goes like comic shops over there and card shops. It was card shops a lot at the time because cards were all the rage. He goes, yeah, they can't get enough of these green card things. They never came out in America. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Not thinking of their value or anything like that. So just to put it in perspective, we've all felt over the pandemic the pinch of collectibles going up in price.
Yep.
You know, we've seen some silly prices. A loose 1, 2, 3 kid a year ago went as high as $1,250 US.
Wow.
Insanity. Loose.
Jeez.
Insanity. There's a wrestler called Matt Cardona who has a wrestling figure podcast called the Major Wrestling Figure Podcast. Somebody borrows the Let 'em Breathe moniker that they came up with on the Toy Power Discord.
Yep.
Yeah.
Borrows and made famous, I think.
And Matt Cardona, to sort of get heel hit, as we say, is a bad guy, set alight a 1, 2, 3 kid on card. just to troll people. And it was like, I thought that was pretty funny, but insane at the same time.
Yeah, about 3 more sitting off camera. Like.
So the other sort of figures we had in Australia at the time was WCW was not big in the early 90s. It would with Nitro, later on with Sting and the NWO and stuff, but they had figures called Galoobs, which was similar in, when I say Galoobs, they were made by Galoob, but we refer to them as Galoobs. They were similar stature to Hasbro's, but with zero articulation. You get Ric Flair, Sting, those sorts of guys. They came out in Australia. Kmart had them for about $5 each. I hate it. I didn't particularly care for them because I wasn't a WCW kid. But now you think about it, I was like, oh, they were sitting right there. Like I would have bought a million. I've got them all now. And yeah, then in Australia there sort of was a lull after Hasbro's and Jakks Pacific. Which Jeremy Padawa, who now is in charge of the company that does Squishmallows and which toy line is it? Jazzwares.
Yes.
Oh yes,
Now at Jazzwares. So he was heavily involved in the wrestling line at the time as a young guy. So Jakks figures, they had bone crunching action is what they were, and you'd sort of open their arm and it would make a bit of a clicking sound. I detested these figures. They looked terrible. The sculpts were bad. Like they just, like Bret Hart, who's my favorite wrestler of all time, he looked like an emu. Like it just, like they weren't there. Like it was still sort of cool to see wrestling figures come out in Australia again, but they just weren't good looking figures. You know, it would take a while for Jakks to find its feet.
Was that because the action feature got in the way, or it just
maybe? I just don't think they cared for sculpts.
Right. No, they didn't look good.
Yeah, you know, it was very basic. And I'm not nostalgic for them because I was 18, 19 sort of when they came out. And I was like, oh, this looks like rubbish. Particularly when you've got McFarlane releasing Spawn figures that are looking awesome. Like you sort of, and I know we laugh at Power of the Force now, but even they were pretty cool figures. So you started to expect a bit more from your action figures. So when you're seeing something, you're going, no, this is rubbish, you know. So Jakks would have the license forever, but ToyBiz would pick up the WCW license, and they also came out in Australia, and they were pretty cool looking. Like ToyBiz always did a pretty good job with figures, as we saw with Marvel Legends, which they'd get into. But so ToyBiz had the WCW license, and Jakks had the WWF license, and wrestling boomed. The NWO became big, shirts were everywhere. Steve Austin became big, Austin 316 shirts were everywhere. Goldberg became huge. Like wrestling boomed again, almost bigger than what it did in the 80s, and wrestling was everywhere. And the toys were everywhere. Exactly, the Attitude Era. And I loved it but hated it at the same time, because that typical gatekeeping thing, a little bit of that thing I stuck by when nobody wanted to watch it, and now everybody can just watch it on pay TV, and everybody's got the shirts and everything. I was like, I like this before it was cool.
I had to work for my VHS tapes, damn it. Like,
yeah, but it was also cool that it was just easily available, and sort of wrestling figures have been available ever since. But what I did get to sort of work out in that time was the history of wrestling figures, because as a teenager, my tastes and appetite for wrestling changed. Of just being a WWF fan, I worked out there was wrestling in Japan. I worked out there were small independent promotions like ECW, like WCW was now on the menu. So I learned about all these things. And the first wrestling figures were actually by, I'm not sure if it's pronounced as Poppy or Popey in Japan. And they had a line of wrestling figures, and they actually made the first Hulk Hogan figure. Because Hogan, he first wrestled in Japan. So these probably came out in 1981. And they're pretty cool figures, really expensive to get your hands on. Like beautiful sculpts. Like Japan just does toys well, doesn't it? Like it's like there's a Terry Funk, there's Abdullah the Butcher, like there's some famous Japanese wrestlers. Like it's a cool line. I've danced with it, and I never bit. It was like a little bit too expensive. Another line that was out at the 80s, and I think they bid on the WWF license and didn't get it, and they got a license with a company called the AWA, the American Wrestling Association, was Remco. Yes. And I think a lot of these bodies that we used on the wrestlers would go on bootleg figures by Remco that you'd see everywhere. And so sort of like famous names Remco would have made with Ric Flair, the Road Warriors or the Legion of Doom, like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Like they were sort of, they're like He-Man figures in a lot of ways. Like I think people would not know that necessarily that they're wrestling figures when they see them. They probably just think they're a bootleg He-Man figure, but they made a ring, they made a cage, they made a belt, and they were available in Australia because I've seen them at Trash and, like, that's your gauge, isn't it? If you see it at Trash and Treasure, you're pretty sure it came out.
People didn't import them to sell them for $2 at a Trash and Treasure.
I'm still skeptical on whether Baxter Stockman came out here, though. I'm still not sure on that one because I never found it. But yeah, so they were around. You then sort of, as you move into your 90s and you've got Jakks and ToyBiz doing that, a company called Original San Francisco Toy Makers, they had the license for WCW before ToyBiz, and they made LJN-esque figures that were a crappier rubber and lighter and smaller, but and they had like Hogan, Sting, and those sorts of guys. They made awful figures. You've got to look them up. They're called Vibrasonic. And I've got one. I've got no.
It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't
it?
Just wait. Just wait till I describe it. They're pretty solid figures with a red button on the side, and you push it, and it just vibrates.
Right.
Oh no!
Right.
Yeah. And it was like, what the hell is this? And
sold in the wrong toy store.
Yeah, exactly. And they I remember I was so excited. I went to a comic store called Comics R Us in the city, and they had a Sting. And he hadn't even, like, he would go on to sort of have a look like the Crow. He went from a surfer dude with blonde hair and bright face paint and neon colors to look like the Crow. And they had the first sort of representation of him in that, and it was a Vibrasonic figure. I paid $50 for that thing, just to sort of have the first Sting figure. And he, like, the figure was done when he was growing his hair out, so it didn't even have the long hair. It was the awkward phase Sting, and he just stood there vibrating. But yeah, so they would go on to actually, when they lost the WCW license, ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, was like the third company. It was sort of like the rebellious company. A lot of guys got their start there, and they were not big enough. They were too big to be small and too small to be big. And sort of like, so when Acclaim lost for WWF video game license, they made an ECW video game. I think they made a couple of them. When Original San Francisco Toy Makers lost for WCW license, they picked up ECW license. So they did a run of ECW figures, and they're actually pretty cool figures. I've got the entire run. I didn't go for the variants, but like I've got everybody. I've got a soft spot for ECW. Yep. It was my rebellious teenage wrestling promotion. It doesn't, like, problematic today to go back and watch ECW. It wasn't politically correct, but it was pretty awesome as a kid seeing all this blood and chaos and scantily clad ladies and all sorts of things teenage boys want to see. And sort of then all the wrestling companies sort of collapsed, and WWF bought WCW and ECW, and Jakks Pacific sort of had the entire run of wrestling figures. And they introduced real scan technology where the faces actually started to get pretty good, but the bodies were ridiculous. Like everybody was the same height. Everybody was jacked. It was always disappointing. You'd have Bobby the Brain Heenan standing next to Andre the Giant and be just as tall as him. It's like, come on, Jakks, put some, you're so close. And they would get there and create some cool figures. And they were the first ones to do the classic superstars line, where the WWF finally worked out there was money in nostalgia.
Yep.
Because they didn't love embracing their past. And Jakks actually had a pretty cool deal where they could negotiate with wrestlers independent of WWF and sign them to figure deals. So like Bret Hart, as an example at the time, who was not on good terms with WWF, neither was the Ultimate Warrior, Jakks signed them to Legends figures. And I remember my mind being blown of, we're getting a Bret Hart figure, this is amazing. So Jakks did some pretty cool stuff, but very hit and miss on whether they're the best wrestling figures of all time or the worst. Probably both, in a lot of ways. Then after about 10 years of having the license, WWF sort of became a lot more kid-friendly, for better or worse. They sort of became the Disney of wrestling, the Coke of wrestling. They were the brand
era, in other words.
Yeah, John Cena.
Yes, John Cena.
They were the only sort of game in town, and they were becoming a lot more family friendly. But what that does is it opens opportunity. Like Mars and Snickers start sponsoring Raw.
Oh, right, okay.
Mattel go, maybe we should make wrestling figures. Where wrestling was so out of control in the late 90s with the Attitude Era and everything. You had boobs everywhere and swear words and, suck it and like all this stuff. A porn star character called Belle Venus. Where now they'd marketed themselves to become really family friendly, Mattel jumped into the market. And Mattel started making wrestling figures. And look, they've done a pretty good job with it. And the line is huge. Like I assume there may be completionists out there, but it would be, I don't know how you could, like you guys would see, like Mattel wrestling figures are everywhere. Not everything comes out, but a pretty good selection of wrestling figures are always on the shelves at any one time. They do a good coverage of legends, of current guys, kids lines. They release rings, replica belts. They pretty much run the gamut of everything, and like Mattel have probably created the best representation of any one wrestler from any era. So if you were going to sort of jump into a wrestling line, I'd point you to Mattel just because it's going to be your one-stop shop.
And they learned from like the mistakes of Jakks, where they had, Andre the Giant was a head taller than everyone else. Like they had different body shapes, and they
haven't been perfect, but a lot better.
Yep.
And they're, I have dabbled in Mattel because it's hard when you see a figure on the shelf.
Oh, yeah.
You just grab it, and it's like you walk in and I go, oh, Bret Hart, how can I not buy Bret Hart? So I've tried limiting myself to just buying Bret Hart figures, but you'd see them and you'd go, that's a Razor Ramon. It reminds me of the Hasbro. Yep. And they'd even do the gear based on the Hasbros and stuff to hit that nostalgia spot. But sort of where I got to it with, I could get the Mattel. I could just look at my Hasbro, which is why I want to get the Mattel, is because it reminds me of the Hasbro that I've got.
Yes.
What am I doing? It's that cycle. And look, we all do it with Marvel figures, with DC figures, with everything. Like we're chasing modern representations of figures that we love, when it's probably better just to focus on the figures that we love, but we don't. We're addicts, and it's how it is. But Mattel were doing that. In Japan, a company called CharaPro or CharaPro. I always said CharaPro because it's how it's spelt, but if it's Character Pro, I guess it would be CharaPro. I don't know. They produced a line of figures for New Japan Pro Wrestling, which are beautiful figures. They're sort of the size, a bit smaller, but they're similar to Galoobs in a way, but their arms and legs move. They're some of the best wrestling figures I think that have ever been made. They're just, the sculpts on them are amazing, like the effort. And as we've seen with action figures, the paint job makes such a big difference on how the figure looks. Like, how many times have you guys seen like a Star Wars figure or a Marvel figure, or even a wrestling figure, and like somebody like a John Lucas Reyes or somebody like that will touch it up, and the paint job shows how good the sculpt of the figure is. Yeah, and I think that's what makes Hot Toys look amazing, is they do a great job of the paint application. And because you see these basic, terrible looking figures that get a touch up of paint, and all of a sudden they look amazing. And that's what with the CharaPros, like they just look incredible, and their accessories there. Now them I have dabbled in at times, and my wrestling collection has gone back and forth to, it has swelled to being ginormous, and then I've said, I'm out. And I've done sell-offs, and then I'm like, oh, why'd I do that? I'm back in, and then I'm out. And I think we've all done that with different lines over the time. So I'm trying to find peace with wrestling, sort of where I think for me, Hasbro's, because that was my journey in the 90s. I'm 2 figures away from the set.
Wow.
Impressive.
Nice.
So, and they're just repaints. It's a black and silver Shawn Michaels in Series 10 and a purple Razor Ramon in Series 10. And they were $50 figures a couple of years ago, and they're $250 figures now. And I should just spend that money and end it. But I can't. Like, it's like
I keep, but then you end it. What's next? Then you've got to go on to.
No, I'd be okay. There were mailaways, but they're so obscenely expensive. Like, there were 3 mailaways. There was a repaint Undertaker, repaint Bret Hart, and a unique Hulk Hogan, which is annoying because he's not just a repaint. But like, you're paying thousands for them. Like, since the boom, like they were probably $200 figures 5-6 years ago. Now they're $3,000 figures. So I block it off in my brain of, I wouldn't have even been able to get them anyway. You know, like you would have, I think you had to cut out a coupon in WWF magazine and send away and get them. So, like I know I'm doing a very condensed version of wrestling's journey, action figure wise, because there's so many. Like, a company called Callion in Mexico did figures for the promotion AAA and CMLL over there. They're really rare figures, like Rey Mysterio, who's really famous. That was his first action figure. They're really cool figures, but once again, it's sort of like the Megator and stuff that were only in Hispanic countries really expensive.
What do you think, like, these crossovers? They do a few of these crossovers. I've seen them meshed up. What have we had? Turtles and Ultimate Warrior meshed up. And most recently, the Origins figures have mashed together these.
Well, they sort of started with the WWF Mo2 line in a way.
It pioneered a lot of the sculpts. So we sort of saw maybe the Fisto armor. Okay, we know they're going to reuse that for Fisto, but it was really quite interesting. They were running it.
I was baffled by that line. Like, it was like, because people were going to me, this must be your dream. They're combining wrestling with Masters of the Universe. I was like, no, not really. Like, it's not giving me what I want from wrestling, and it's not giving me what I want from Masters of the Universe. So I don't know what this is. Like, it's funny. I got a Macho Man and Andre the Giant. I stripped all the Motu armor off them, and they're pretty cool
figures,
wrestling figures. But some of them you couldn't. They were too modified. Like, I did, because Bret Hart's my guy. Like, it's sort of cool in concept, like Bret Hart's Triclops, because he'd wear the shades. So you've got that. Like, it's cool. But I think the line was a bit of a fail, but what it did spawn was we got the Origins line, and now with wrestling, we've got what they're calling the Superstars line. And they're pretty much those figures, but wrestling.
Yes, that's right.
And
that makes more sense.
They're amazing because they're cartoony, and it's sort of realistic is fun in a way, but it's a bit boring when you're doing the 80s and 90s characters where they were wacky. You know, I almost think you sort of need to go cartoony and over the top a little bit with them. And I think the Superstars line, they're Walmart exclusive. The Superstars line is probably my favorite line of current wrestling figures that are out there, just because they look so cool. It was like Mattel finally figured it out. Not distribution. That they're awful at. And I made the worst mistake in, there's a company called Stackery that you can buy in America, send to there, and they'll forward to Australia. And I had some Superstars figures on pre-order, and Walmart do stupid pre-orders where 9 months in advance you can order from Walmart, or 3 months, and they keep delaying it. And I forgot. And all of a sudden, Stackery emailed me going, "You've got 2 figures sitting here," and it was a Kevin Nash, old super shredder himself, Saxy.
Yes, we got it in there. I'm glad.
And Shawn Michaels is sitting there, and I'm like, cool, whatever. I'm just, it'll sting a little bit. I'll just ship them, whatever. I just did it the other day. $100 Australian for 2 figures.
Just for shipping.
Just for shipping.
Oh, you're kidding.
I felt sick. I almost was going to email them, going, just put the figures in the bin. I'd rather almost just lose out on what I paid for the figures and not pay this $100. But you just get to that thing of I'm just going to do it, and I'll never again, sort of thing. So people be careful with the forwarding companies. It's just shipping's just so rough, and they didn't give me a basic option to ship to Australia, and it was $95 plus they stung me with a $5 whatever tax, and it was rough. But they are my favorite line of figures. Unfortunately, being Walmart exclusives, we don't get them in Australia.
Very tough, yeah.
But I got the Turtles wrestling figures because it was just sort of cool to see them. I preferred the Turtle crossover than I did the Motu crossover.
Yes. Right.
Yep.
Okay.
I actually I wanted to get the Turtle Ghostbusters, but they never came out here.
They did. I saw them.
We had them at our Toy World. Yeah.
Really? I never actually saw them.
No, we definitely had them in Australia. Whether they were toy
because they're expensive to try and find now. The Turtle Ghostbusters are I love Ghostbusters. The Turtles, for some reason, I can handle them cosplaying. Wrestlers cosplaying as Masters of the Universe people, it was just a weird concept. They try, because they did a Castle Grayskull ring, they did a Snake Mountain ring. They gave it a go, but I just I don't know who it was meant to appeal to. I think they missed everybody. But it has given us what Origins are now. You guys did an awesome job, by the way, of going over Masters of the Universe. You actually helped me come to the realization of I don't need Origins. It's what am I doing? It's because it's not going to end. And then I've got doubles of these vintage He-Man figures that I've got. They're cool, but the vintage is cool. It's the excitement of seeing stuff on the shelf,
it's the excitement of being able to click a button and put it in your cart rather than hunting eBay or hunting the markets and things trying to find it. It's and you can place that pre-order 6 months in advance for a character that you will get eventually, but finding the vintage version is a lot harder. So I 100% agree.
And that's sort of been my journey with wrestling, and probably a lot of figure collecting. It's that excitement of seeing it on the shelves. And that's why it's a bit of a shame losing Toys R Us and retail being the way it is action figures now, it's different. Back then, you see Hasbro's on the shelf for $5. You see some of the, I saw a 3 3/4 Star Wars figure for $34.
Yeah.
And it's and that's legit. That's Zing, I think. Yeah. And I was what? Who's paying this?
Yeah.
It's
Marvel Legends are now $65 or something like that.
Some of the special edition ones.
Even the Origins, which breach that line between it could be a kid's toy, for an 8-year-old, or it could perfectly be a nostalgia fix for an adult. But still at $20, that's a month's worth of pocket money for any 8-year-old that's getting $5 a week. And are they going to be patient enough to collect more than 5 characters in the space of that time? They can earn that amount of money, and then they've just got to have their fingers crossed every time they walk in to the shop. They've got a choice, not just He-Man and Skeletor clogging the pegs. That's the other thing,
No kids collecting Origins.
No, I understand that, but I
know, but they would. I think there's a chance if they were appropriately priced. If they were $15 and you could walk in and they were readily available, I think. Even us enabling our kids by buying it for them, I'd buy my youngest Hunter, I'd buy him He-Man figures if I could just get them for $15 and he'd be my proxy. Even if he didn't want them, I'd force them on him. But you can't, when you start paying $20 to $25, you start going, it's a lot of money. And I was telling the guys before we started recording, I was in Big W and they had the reissue Turtles for $11. And that piqued my interest. I didn't need them. I've got them. I've got the vintage of them. I've got the reissues of them. I've got reissues from about 5 years ago and reissues from about 10 years ago. It's I've got so many I've got so many Ninja Turtle van reissues that there's a local wrestler here, Crackerjack, that he's like, why don't you put them on your feet and your hands and just roll around them? Which always made me laugh that that's where he went to of what I should do with the turtle vans that I have. And it's like, but because I got it for Christmas one year from Santa, when you just see that packaging,
you can't.
it gets you. Like even those weird reissued Transformers that are in vintage packaging, but the figures aren't accurate that are at Target and stuff.
They almost got me. I almost picked
They
them
got
up.
me too.
They've got me too.
It's got me. Yeah, and then I was reading and people going, these figures aren't accurate and blah blah blah. And I was like, I don't even want these things. If that's the case. Like, I didn't even care. It was just I saw the packaging and it took me back to that nostalgia.
I'm like, I don't have a mind back. I don't have these figures in my G1 collection.
And you still
almost
don't.
And then I realized, hey, they're reissues of the whatever line,
the modern one,
and they're not.
So,
and I'm like,
just in case I get pounced on, in wrestling companies jumping around, ToyBiz picked up the TNA license for a while there. They were available in Australia. There was a 6-sided ring because TNA had a different wrestling ring. 6-sided rings were used in Mexico and TNA adopted it and brought it into America. And they were pretty cool and they were pretty good sculpts too. But ToyBiz went under.
Yep.
And when they went under, that license got picked up by Jakks, who lost the WWF license. They half-assed the line. They were out here, but it just, like Jakks don't do a good job with toys. And we've now seen AEW, All Elite Wrestling, which is the wrestling company which has grabbed my interest again, and my son loves it, and I love father-son bonding with him and watching the wrestling. They Jazzwares have brought out figures that you will see at Toy World. They've brought out a replica belt, a ring. The funny thing with that ring is it's the same mold as the ToyBiz ring that came out in the 90s. You find that these molds get reused. And I'm pretty sure somebody was saying that, I could be wrong, that was the bendy mold that WWF had. So I don't even know how that works with reuse of molds crossing companies and stuff like that. And Jazzwares actually bought the naming rights to LJN and have bought out rubber wrestlers using the LJN packaging.
Okay, right.
Yep.
Okay.
But nobody can recapture the heft and type of rubber.
No.
Material.
It's probably highly cancerous.
And probably, and it's probably expensive, is what I would say. It's like back metal and stuff like that in the 80s that you rarely get it replicated well. Now, like for some reason, some of the stuff that they could do in the 80s,
they can't do anymore. Holograms, they're a tough one.
Yeah. Like, how cool were holograms? I thought holograms were going to be the future.
Yeah.
Like, even holograms, I had a soft spot for Supernaturals because I think they must have been at cheap stores, and I had a few Supernaturals. But I remember video game magazines when I started to discover gaming. You'd get holograms on the front of the magazines. I've got a Mean Machines magazine with a hologram Mario for Mario 3 on the front, which is really cool. But Scotty did ask me to do a quiz, but bugger off, Scotty. I don't do homework. I'm not going to, it's bad enough I'm running the show here. This is a Toy Power podcast, not the Criss Fresh podcast. So no quiz from me, but we did get to do a trip down memory lane. You could talk for hours if you really wanted to get in depth about wrestling figures. But if people are going, where would I start? Vintage, you're screwed. Just because
it's like a lot of toy lines that feel like that. And I think that is why.
Everything is so expensive. With LJNs, I probably got 3/4 way there. And then it was like, it's so pointy now. I'm not going to make it. So I'm just going to back out and just focus on Hasbro's. And I made a tidy profit getting out. I've kept a select few that represent the time to me. But, it was like, if I can't complete it, what am I doing? Like, I've got this 3/4 complete collection, and I've got some really super rare pieces in here. Like the rarest Hasbro, the rarest LJN is actually a Hasbro, because G.I. Joe did a mail away Sergeant Slaughter in the LJN style. And there's a lot of contentious issues. I love this, of whether you consider that an LJN. Me personally, I do.
Yeah.
It's in the big rubber style. Sergeant Slaughter was in the WWF. It's there, but it's weird. It's a Hasbro figure.
Yeah.
And we're sort of, seeing, well, Sergeant Slaughter was a crossover with G.I. Joe, you know, and if you're looking for another wrestling crossover, and it always makes me laugh when you guys talk about it, William Refrigerator Perry, who was an NFL player that got a G.I. Joe figure, was in the NFL versus Wrestler Battle Royal at WrestleMania 2. Technically, it's a wrestling figure. And G.I. Joe, if you want to talk crossovers, just I'll close it on this because I regret not getting it. I know Dirty Uncle Mitch, he regrets not getting it because he loves Rowdy Roddy Piper. At San Diego, probably 10, 12 years ago, G.I. Joe released a Rowdy Roddy Piper figure. It looks awesome. Worth hundreds. It's like the San Diego like figures, like especially in the early days, or even now, but particularly in the early days, like if you didn't pounce those things
gone.
Like I guess, like, you know, Transformers, like they did the Sky Striker Starscream and stuff like that. I always thought it was cool in concept, but just worth a zillion dollars. I think I've got the one San Diego exclusive that I don't particularly want, that's probably not worth any money. I got the movie Optimus Prime, and it's in truck form, and it's displayed in this awesome packaging and stuff, but bugger Michael Bay. But yeah, just that to be the one San Diego exclusive I do have. But wrestling figures do get cool exclusives every Comic-Con every year. This year, I don't know if you know the movie No Holds Barred, which was a wrestling movie that came out in the 80s where Hulk Hogan faced Zeus, Tiny Lister. They released Zeus and Hogan in VHS packaging.
That's right. Yes.
There it is.
Sold out in seconds on Mattel Creations. Thanks, Mattel Creations. But yeah, so they did a Sergeant Slaughter in LJN packaging last year. So they've done some really cool exclusives as well. So my recommendation is, if you don't mind wrestling and you want to know where to start, just go Mattel, because they've done everything and they've done it pretty well. You're not going to be nostalgic for the old stuff because you didn't collect it back then. But this Mattel bizarrely holds value. So if it came out 6-7 years ago, it's going to cost you. But Mattel's done, a lot of collectors are up in arms about it. I don't know how you guys would feel about it. Like, so WrestleMania 7 Ultimate Warrior, where he had a career-ending match with Macho Man, those figures were in a line called Defining Moments. They came out 8 years ago. I've got them. Worth a fortune. This year, they're redoing them.
8 years. That's a short turnaround.
I think it's good because
I think it's good too. Because people have a chance. I don't buy as an investment. I buy because I'm a psycho, and I've got
You're
a problem.
our kind of psycho.
But you know, a lot of collectors get upset, going, "No, if you missed this 8 years ago, you shouldn't get it now because it's going to devalue what I've got." But it's like, nah,
it's not what it's about.
It's gatekeeping at the end of the day.
But people missed out. Like, you know, it's So that's it for wrestling figures. If you're feeling like you want to start collecting wrestling figures, go to the SBS watch Dark Side of the Ring, and it will depress you about the business of professional wrestling so much. You won't want to buy anything.
You won't want to contribute to that.
I'll go work in the industry like I did, and I'll kill it for you. But thanks, guys, for having me on to talk figures. I personally adore each and all of you. And we haven't had a chance to talk about it, but, you know, coming over and hanging with you guys early in the year was, like, by far a hell of a year for me, by far the highlight of it. It was so much fun. I wish I could come across again in October. I'll try and get across next year. I've got some terrible news in Paul Jonesy is coming across in October.
No, that's not terrible.
He better have a lot of money, because we're going to charge him double for everything he picks up.
Come back to that. But Jonesy and Lady J are driving across to Adelaide for the toy fair. I think they heard Mitch and I raving about what a great time we had, and it is that toy fair that Brett runs is the best toy fair I've ever been to. Like, all due respect to the Malvern Toy Fair here in Melbourne, they're cool. Like, they're running every 2 months. Like, it's a regular thing. We're using it as a social thing. Like, it's because a lot of the time it's the same stalls and you're saying the same stuff. But, you know, we're finding it as an excuse to catch up with each other. But, you know what? There's nothing like Brett's Toy Fair, the Adelaide Comic and Toy Fair. Like, it's worth traveling interstate for. And you get to see cool guys like Trent, Frank, Ben, and Scotty, and you'll see a random Davey Damaged. Like, just look for the neon colors glowing.
You'll spot him.
You may see Casey and her unnamed partner. Well, that's an inside reference. Wandering around the toy fair, but it is a great time. I'm jealous. I hope you guys have the best time. I wish I had have got to see Darren, but it was nice sort of seeing his collection going to homes where people will appreciate it. And it was actually nice seeing what he had and almost feeling a connection. Going, right on, Darren.
Respect.
I love that too, and it'll go, oh, Darren, why'd you buy that for? It was great, but you guys were doing the Lord's work for Darren's parents. I know you don't talk about it. You don't put yourselves over, as we would say in the wrestling business, but what you guys have done for his family was incredible. And you'll forever have my love and respect, because it was awesome what you guys did, and also the entertainment you have provided us, because your podcast is amazing. Scotty, I'm glad you're on board. You're the unsung hero of this show, mate. Look, you're a bit tardy with getting the podcast started tonight, and you gave me homework. We'll talk about that off air. But no, in all seriousness, I love this show. I love getting to come on, and I never stop.
Oh,
beautiful.
Mate,
thank you.
Thank you so much. And it is, I know your show is on hiatus at the moment, and it's wonderful, I think, for listeners
hear your voice.
to hear your voice over the airways. Let's be honest, you were 90% of this episode as far as the words spoken, which is wonderful.
Don't blame me for the numbers.
Its podcast is still going strong. But will we see Geek Dudes come back in any way, shape, or form to round out the 10-year anniversary? Because we're all hanging. Exclusive Toy Power podcast to reveal. Go.
There's a lot going on this year, but I've spoken to Mitch and Jonesy about next year. Being me, I actually was working on a new concept for a podcast, because Geek Dudes is fun, but it's so entwined with personal life and everything like that. When that gets hectic, it feels inauthentic to podcast and not address stuff. And, you want to just talk about the fun stuff. And I was like, Mitch has lost Massive Attack now because Joe, the guy he was doing the podcast with, wanted to step back, which is fair enough.
He did try and do a solo episode, but it was very, very audio. There was audio issues, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, man, are you able to clean this up? Because it's almost impossible to hear. Like, I don't know what happened, but it was almost as if he was muted the mics or something. I don't know."
Yeah, I give him credit, because it's hard when you just turn it on and you're by yourself, and it's like, let's. He even put audio clips in there. I was impressed. I just demand Jonesy come great distance and just record everything that I do. But we'll be back in podcast form in one way, shape, or form next year. I can pretty much guarantee that. Just even if it's just for us, because you guys know it's therapeutic to sort of catch up and sort of.
Absolutely.
It's a social event as well, as much as it's fun.
It's just
for
a recorded social event, really.
That's it.
Just for the record, the reason Geek Dudes went on hiatus was me. I needed a break, but I did pitch to Jonesy to do Geek Attack, where they could just continue on and they'd probably gain extra listeners not having me on, and do something together. But they wanted to. It was for trio or nothing, for them, which is fair. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if we can have our Beatles moment where we're on top of a building.
We need to hear out the rest of the song, the Who Forgot the Lyrics, at least.
When you realise he's not even halfway through, we'll be going to where 80 try to
longest running segment
complete that.
I'll still be listening, bro. I'll still be listening.
But I recommend to your listeners, subscribe to the Patreon, because you get to join the Discord and it's an awesome community in there. But also you're supporting these dudes who like weekly. It's hard to do a podcast every week, and people don't realize that, but it is. It's effort, it's editing, it's content, it's travel. it's everything. So, you know, every little bit helps sort of keeping it going. There's hosting fees, there's equipment, there's everything. So, you know, if you want to help the dudes out, you know, I subscribe to their Patreon because it's one of the better ones that you can throw your money at.
No. Thank you, Fresh.
Thank you.
And on that note, a big thank you to all our patrons because it is wonderful having you on there. Lots of comments, lots of chatter. We love it. It's great. And some wonderful scores going around as always. Hey, thanks, guys, for coming in.
Amazing.
Great to hear more about wrestling.
I now need to go make multiple wrestling figure databases and then try and link them all because that timeline you went through without notes, I might add, was absolutely
unbelievable.
amazing.
Yeah, I'm so lazy. Like, I did today go to myself, I should do notes so I'm like linear and sort of go through everything. I was like, I'm just going to riff off the top of my head. It's how
And you've done it.
And I held my microphone, Davey, the whole time.
Like a savage.
Oh, that is awesome. Thank you, Fresh. Thanks to everyone else for tuning in to another episode of Toy Power. It is super cool to have your company. We really appreciate it. And until next time, stay safe, take care. And that button.
And until next time, good journey!
You can find the Toy Power team at all the usual online places. Facebook.com/ToyPowerPodcast, at Toy Power Podcast on both Twitter and Instagram, or have your say and email us toypowerpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe to the show on both iTunes and Stitcher, and please leave us a review. Otherwise, we just assume we're awesome.